This is episode 16 of Is This a Dream? So, waiting for a few people to jump on. Hello, hello. Let me know if you can hear me. This is the book that we are covering. Is This a Dream? It is available on Amazon. If you've read the book, please do review it on Amazon. And we are finishing up chapter 4, or we have finished up chapter 4, which was Where Does Consciousness Go When I Die? And we are now on chapter 5, the 3 stages of meditation. All right. Hello, Claudia from Portugal. Dijane, good to see you on LinkedIn. Make sure, yes, YouTube is working. All right, fantastic. So we are on chapter 5. Oh, sorry, yes, chapter 5, the 3 stages of meditation. And as people are logging in, let's take a few minutes, spend some time in silence together. So just relax and take a few deep breaths. As we share what we call a virtual space. We're in different physical locations, but virtually we're in a space together. Another way to say that is mentally, as the mind, we are sharing the exact same space. So everything that we talk about, share, question today is going to be within this shared space. Breathe in and out of this shared space. Okay. Hello, Hildy, Rachel, Ingrid, Linda in DC. Good to see you all. So we'll start with the questions from last week. All right, we finished up chapter 4, and the questions were one big one right off the bat. We talked a lot about reincarnation. We talked about lifetimes. We talked about that which persists, that which begins and ends. And so right off the bat, a question is reincarnation real? And we said last time that many times these questions, unfortunately, are labeled as religious questions or spiritual questions rather than very practical questions. Right? It's very relevant to today what happened yesterday, right? It's very relevant to tomorrow what happens today. Similarly, if there is such a thing as different lifetimes, then that's a very practical matter, right? It does not have to be a religious issue. So let's look at this topic straightforwardly. Is reincarnation real? If we experience that what we are is primarily a body, right? If this is the beginning and end of our experience, if the major part of what we are, of our existence, is defined strictly as physical, then reincarnation is not real, right? Meaning what? Meaning the experience or the understanding is that reincarnation is not real. Why? Because the body begins on a particular date and it ends on a particular date when it stops moving. And at that point, it begins to decompose. This is true of every body, whether it's a living human body, whether it's the body of a book, right, that was created, was made on some date, at some point it'll decompose. So all bodies decompose at some point. So, if that's how we experience ourselves, and in this society, a majority of attention, at least in the public sphere and the secular sphere, is on physicality. So then reincarnation is experienced as not real. We see there's no such thing. That's mystical, that's spiritual, that's strange, right? Now, if we experience ourselves as a particular mind, this particular mind, right, that had this particular characteristics, that likes wearing a yellow shirt or that likes to play tennis, this particular mind, then it's in a middle state, right? Because these tendencies may outlast a body, right? These tendencies, if strong enough, can accumulate another body. Because from the second mind perspective, that which we call the body, this physicality, is the accumulation and representation of the tendencies of the mind, right? The body, in a sense, reveals the mind. So, from this perspective, then reincarnation, there is a reality to it because what we are, our tendencies, the way we wish to express, is not limited to one particular body. Now, if we go beyond this, beyond the idea of a particular body, and beyond even the experience of a particular mind, to the essential nature of things, right? To, let's call it, an underlying consciousness. Let's call it awareness. Let's call it potential being, whatever we want to call it. If there is this, which is the deepest aspect of what we are, right? Or the subtlest aspect of what we are, then from this perspective, again, there's no reincarnation in the sense that this itself is not subject to birth and death. Right? So there are three lenses through which we can look at this question of reincarnation. If I experience myself as the body, then there's no idea of reincarnation, right? Because this is it. And that's a predominant view in society. If I experience myself as a mind, as that mind becomes subtler, then its vision can go beyond the experience of one body or another body. So, with respect to that mind, yes, it takes different forms, right? And there's research on this that we can see. There's research on children that are recollecting prior lives. There's research on children who have birthmarks at sites where they had wounds from previous lives. They'll remember details that have been confirmed in research by looking back at the data and the historical data representing other people's lives. So there's all kinds of research on this. That's one thing, to look at the research. I think it's important that we look at ourselves, right? As that mind becomes subtle, it can see beyond the curtain of one lifetime, just like the curtain opens and closes for a particular act of a play. And then, as consciousness itself, we need not talk about reincarnation because that again is relative to a particular mind and body. That consciousness is unborn, as it were, and it's unending. This is why Vedanta, this philosophy, means the the end of knowledge, right? Meaning that the culmination of all knowledge, right? With neither a beginning nor an end. This deepest knowledge of what we are has no beginning and no end. It's not bracketed by birth and death, right? So, with respect to recognizing the deeper nature of the mind, yes, reincarnation is recognized. With respect to just the body, it seems as no, it's not there. And from the perspective of consciousness itself, what we might say is the third mind, then again, reincarnation is not a question because we're not talking about the arising and subsiding of form, right? And these are all relevant and important when we look at society. This isn't some philosophy that's removed from life, because recognizing what we are helps us to ascertain what is going on in our society, how we must act, how we must engage to make this a better place while we are here in this form. So let's intersperse some meditations today. Come back to this deeper nature within us and recognize the juxtaposition of this space that we share, this presence that we share, and the ability to talk, to discuss, to ask questions. Right? This is essential to what we're doing here as a society. We can be within ourselves and we can enter this movement with each other in society, this complementarity. All right. So the next question is there such a thing as truth? So there are many levels of truth, again, right? So it depends on the assumptions that we hold to be true, right? Having made certain assumptions, we have certain truths, right? When we're talking about consciousness, yesterday I talked about COVID-19, for example, right? So at a particular level, we're individuals in a society and we're facing a pandemic and we need to act, right? These are truths. There is a virus called COVID-19. I was working in the ER yesterday. I saw its effects, right? So this is one level of truth, and we need to act at this level of truth. Now, at a deeper level, we can say, well, what is the deeper nature of what we are? What is the deeper nature of the human being, or of a virus, or of an object, of this room, of space, right? That's a different level of truth. And these don't need to butt heads, right? We don't have to choose one or the other. We can see that they're successive layers of truth expressing in different ways. And as a society, we choose the layer at which we wish to engage. Different people, different beings see and experience different layers, and we choose those layers, right? So when we say, is there such a thing as truth? It's always relative to what we are perceiving. Now, we might say there are some hard truths. 1 plus 1 is 2, right? Nobody would say that's an opinion. 1 plus 1 is 2. Even in here, there is some subjectivity, right? We're, of course, assuming what the plus means. It means we're adding a quantity to the other. It doesn't mean that we're placing them adjacent to each other, because 1 plus 1, if we're just making them adjacent, it could be 11, right? So plus means adding the units, the value of the units. So there's interpretation there, right? Even to see one, to recognize one unit of anything, one finger, one book, right? One piece of paper. To recognize one of anything, one's own identity has to come in relationship with it. The sense of individuality has to come into relationship and superimpose that sense of individuality on whatever it is that is here. And that is how we detect one of something. So you can see there is an interpretive process behind even that which we say is independently real or independently true, like, for example, mathematics. Right? So this is why there are levels of truth. Now, is there an absolute truth? Right? This, what we say is absolutely true, that would be which is prior to interpretation. Right? Because all that we know is true, everything that we say is true, or everything that we say is false, comes from a fundamental awareness or a fundamental aliveness or ability to discern. Not discerning itself, but the very potential for discernment. Right? There's a difference. So when I'm discerning, there's already a process in action. right? I'm discerning one from two, two from three. There's a discernment, right? I'm discerning right from wrong. But the very potential, how does that potential arise to discern, right? How do we know about perceptions? How do we know about bodies and brains and minds? How do we talk about consciousness? How do we perceive space? Why is there the perception of flowing, which we call time, and rhythm, right? That which is prior to all this is in philosophy called truth. That which cannot be negated because it is required to even begin the process of negation or assertion. So that which is true is also incredibly simple, too simple for the thinking mind. Now, this doesn't mean that there are no other levels of truth. Of course, there are, right? In our society, we have mathematics, we have medicine, we have history, we have politics, we have sociology. There's so much happening in the world now. But we will see that to the extent that there is a non recognition of this underlying truth, to that extent, all of these modifications also need updating. They need revision, right? So in history, what do we say? We say history is written by the victors, right? And it's true because if a person wins the war, then they're going to tell their side of the story, and that's going to be history, right? In spirituality, we see that the tendency for the pendulum swing, right, from one way to the other, all the way in one direction or all the way, everything is consciousness, period, done, right? So in spirituality, there's a need for an update to bring some balance, right? In science, we need to go beyond the classical view of things and look at the quantum view of things and what that suggests about our own minds and our own identity, right? So you will see that in any field where there are truths, history, science, sociology, in every field where there is truth and it is valuable and we engage at that level of truth, that truth will be incomplete to the extent that we are not recognizing the deeper truth from which these fields of truth emerge, or which informs and expresses as these more external representative truths. Right? So we have relative truth and absolute truth doing their dance. Let's take a moment here. So we can sense the deeper truth prior to thought. And also you might notice that as the awareness drops, drops meaning drops deeper and deeper, moves deeper and deeper, that it'll bring the thoughts and emotions that have been below the surface into our awareness. So this is another opportunity to engage, to recognize that awareness and emotion, awareness and thought, awareness and action are not in opposition to each other. This is why I'm doing this, so we can keep shifting, get used to shifting our attention. Words, thoughts, feelings, awareness. Right? Just like we have a hand here and we might use it to grasp something, right? I grasp the book here. and then pulling it back, and then I release it, right? It's a skill that we learn in infancy. Well, this is just as important a skill to learn with our own awareness. A free form awareness, a very particular kind of awareness. Awareness as thought, awareness as emotion, awareness as action, and unfettered awareness. All are equally important in functioning. All right. So, first mind is fragmented and diverse. In some way, is it connected to the whole thing? So, there's extensive conversation on first mind, second mind, third mind in previous talks. So please do check those out. Fragment and diverse. So when there's a sense of particular personalized identity, this is what we call the first mind. This is who we are as individuals, right? At the level of individuality, this is who we are. And it's diverse, yes. Is it connected to the whole thing? Yes, it is an aspect of the whole thing. It is not just connected to this deeper awareness, to what we might call the third mind. It is the very representation of that, right? Just as if we have a particular state of mind, then that state of mind might express in a particular action, right? So let's say we're feeling happy. And if we're feeling happy, maybe we write a poem or we paint something, right? So that painting is an expression, a very particular kind of expression with very distinct boundaries, right? Let's say it's on a canvas. It has particular boundaries, it has particular forms and colors. So that painting is a particular expression of a mind, right? In a sense, it is not different from that mind. It is the physicalized representation of that mind. So in a similar way, what we call the first mind, a particular identity, is a representation of a deeper consciousness. So it is not only that we are connected to this, it is that we are this, which is why we hear all those sayings, know thyself, look within, right? All of these are telling us to look at our own deeper nature, that we are not only connected to, but which is our essential nature. Just like a gust of wind is not connected to air, right? We can say it's connected to air. If we're only seeing the gust of wind and we don't recognize air, then we can tell the gust of wind, hey, gust of wind, you are actually connected to air. Yes, it makes sense. When we look at this more closely, we'll see that it's not really that the gust of wind is connected to air, it's that the gust of wind is air in a particular form, taking a particular action as a particular modification. Right? A gust of wind is air modified. So similarly, we as individuals are this fundamental consciousness modified. From the first mind perspective, because the identity is very distinct within a boundary, the sea of awareness, right, or the sea of potential, which self-modifies as the individual particularities of this world, is not recognized. That's where that boundary comes in. So it's not about destroying the boundary, but it's about seeing through the boundary and still being able to function as that boundary, right? Our entire society, everything we know, knowledge, words, understanding, operates with boundaries. Otherwise, there's no way to distinguish one thing from another. So boundaries are not the problem. In fact, we always say we need to set boundaries, right? Boundaries themselves are not the problem. It's the misconstruing of the nature of a boundary and becoming confined to only these particular boundaries that are the common storylines in our society without being able to see through them and adjust them this way and that. This is what causes the sense of constriction and restriction. All right. Talia says, even the cell must have a boundary. Exactly. Anything that we can name has a boundary. A finger has a boundary. A book has a boundary. The eye has a boundary. Right? A particular kind of mind has a boundary. And certainly the cell has a boundary that we call the cell membrane. Right? And that boundary distinguishes within this boundary is the cell. Beyond this boundary is not the cell. Right? Within this boundary is the book. Beyond this boundary is not the book. We call it space. So the boundary is not the problem, but it's the reifying of that boundary as being independent and external of our experience. Starts with wholeness, yes. A boundless society is anarchy and mass disruption, dysfunction, yes. So we can experience boundlessness within ourselves, we can recognize boundlessness, and then we can use boundaries. We can superimpose boundaries as we already do. We are already superimposing boundaries, right? I mentioned this example before. If you look at the boundary of this finger, it looks very distinct, but if you zoom in, you'll see there's no distinct boundary there, right? There are several cells. And if you look beyond that, even the cell's boundary is not a boundary, it's molecules. Beyond that is atoms and so on. So these boundaries that we see that appear so distinct are superimpositions of the nervous system, of the interpreting mind. Right? They're useful and they're functional, and they're not independent and external. The recognition of the boundary depends on the perceiving mind. All right. So here's a longer question, a couple longer paragraphs. As you've said, our individual selves can be thought of as consciousness personing. Yes, right? This fundamental potential, self-modifying as living beings, which is what we are, right? At the individual level, we're individual human beings. Yes. So it's easy for this concept to slip right through my fingers. Why is this? Is it that being aware of being aware is so close to us that it becomes easily overlooked? That's one reason, is that the attention is habitually directed in one direction. That's something that we do in our society, right? This is what meditation is about. We're starting the chapter on meditation. What is meditation? We can talk about this a little bit now. Meditation is simply a way of seeing more of what we are, right? It's not about necessarily sitting down with our legs a particular way. It's not about a particular action. It's seeing more and more of what we are. And intimately connected with that is seeing more and more of what this world is, right? So seeing the impulses behind our actions, seeing the motives behind our actions, seeing how the mind is moving, seeing the deeper layers of our own anatomy, right? Beyond simply physicality, beyond thoughts and emotions, and also including thoughts and emotions, also including physicality. All this seeing, knowing, recognizing, this is meditation. So if that's the case, if attention is habitually directed to only one aspect of what we are, which is physicality, then it's easy to forget the deeper nature, right? So that's what's being said here. Is it that being aware of being aware is so close to us? Yes, it's so close to us. And at a deeper level, it is us. I think that really can be a challenge. There's a difference between seeing something, and then it can be even more difficult to see something that's very close to us. That can be difficult to see. But it's most difficult to see what is us, right? Because that usual technique of looking, which is to direct attention, that doesn't work to see ourselves as we are, right? To see ourselves as we are is simply being ourselves. So, or is it that we are looking for consciousness awareness to show up as an object which it can never be? Exactly. Right? Consciousness is not an object. Now, at subtle planes of meditation, we might be able to detect subtle effects, subtle presence that feels like this effervescence of what we are, very close to us, very intimate. What we are, however, is not something that we detect as something else. It is simply what we are. And because of the attention going habitually in one direction, that's why this I can grasp the concept in the palm of my hand comfortably. However, just as easily, it can slip right through the fingers. And then the second one is if consciousness is primary and fear, anger, and the other darker parts of the spectrum all serve to further concretize the boundary of the first mind configuration, how can we put the concepts of the three minds to real practical use and connect with more love? So, that which we call the lighter and the darker aspects. So, here, fear, anger, and the other darker aspects. I wonder if it's useful to talk about darker or not darker. These are aspects of what we are. These are our experiences, right? Before being good or bad or before being light or dark, these are aspects of what we are. And it's not about leapfrogging these experiences, right? It's about recognizing what they point to, what they indicate in our experience. So anger comes from somewhere, right? If I feel angry, it comes from somewhere. So feeling the root of that. If I feel sad, it comes from somewhere. If I simply say it's dark or it's bad or it's a negative aspect of it, then it doesn't get reconciled and integrated. It just sits there in the psyche, right? And then it acts in its own way. It pushes its own buttons. So in terms of concretizing the boundary, remember many weeks ago, many months ago, when we were talking about the boundary, what we said is feeling and recognizing and sitting with that boundary is one tactic, right? What does that mean? That boundary is made up also of these emotions, whether it's anger, sadness, fear, right? Even excitement. All of these constitute the boundary of what we are, right? Constitute the sense of individuality. And so feeling these in meditation. So if we sit and as these experiences come up, you can simply recognize them and feel them, right? And it's kind of like an engine, like a processing center. As we feel them, they are less apt to trigger subconsciously when we're out functioning in the world, right? So the practical use of the three minds here is recognizing the boundary and not running from the boundary, not wanting to break the boundary, right? Not making the boundary an enemy, but saying, hey, this is a useful aspect of life, a useful aspect of existing. We need the boundary to function. We could not be speaking to each other right now or communicating without boundaries, right? So it's a very subtle point where the boundary can become limiting and cause suffering, but then the solution is not to get rid of it, it's to see through it, to lighten it. And the process of doing that is to be with some of these emotions like fear, anger, that are with us already and that are in the psyche. Right? This is contrary to many conversations you may hear about simply transcending. Right? I read a paper recently in Frontiers in Psychology that talked about the meaning of self-transcendence and how it's used differently in different contexts. So let's keep that in mind here. Transcending is not necessarily, or not at all, about jumping over these emotions and hoping they disappear, but rather meeting them and integrating them step by step. And in so doing, the mind clears. Otherwise, what happens is there's this jumping effect that happens, right? Where we jump states rather than having a seamless clarity, and rather than being able to use our mind in the ways that we want, it becomes lodged in particular states because there are aspects of it that aren't integrated. So this is a constant process as we are here, as we are living, as we're engaging in the world, a constant process of meeting ourselves deeply and integrating this boundary through which we can express. Right? How do we show up in any experience with an open heart and ultimately realize if we harm each other, we also harm ourselves? It's exactly from this, what we just said. Right? So that tendency to harm becomes more when I am escaping my own harm, when I'm escaping the things within me, right? And in a way, harming myself. But if I can sit with myself, if I can be okay with the anger, right? Without having to spiritualize it and extinguish it, right? Not that we want to be angry, but that recognizing that anger comes from somewhere, it has a meaning, and going to the root of that and experiencing that without having to lash out. So making that choice, or fear, or sadness. By doing this, the heart opens, right? Without this, the heart can't really open. There's going to be a layer. There's going to be some stuff caked on. So the solution to this, to dealing with this boundary, seeing this boundary, reconciling this boundary, clarifying this boundary, is always engaging it, right? So when there's talk about transcendence, it's not transcendence through avoidance. It's transcendence through engagement of oneself, including those things that are considered dark or considered light. Ultimately, we talked about truth earlier. What is true is true. We might say some is light, some is dark. That's all secondary. But that this is there, that there is this experience, that's true. So we have a couple minutes. So I'll just read these two paragraphs from The 3 Stages of Meditation. This is the book, Is This a Dream? It's available on Amazon. Please do leave a review if you read it. 3 paragraphs, 2 short ones and 1 longer one. First, what is meditation? Meditation is an introspective technique that increases your awareness of who and what you are, and a result of what the world is, and as a result of what the world is. Right? As we see ourselves, we see others more clearly. As we see ourselves more clearly, we see the world more clearly. Right? Because it is one and the same lens that is looking out and recognizing our own personality, our own body, another's body and personality, the world, all of this is seen through a lens. So meditation is recognizing this lens. Most people in our society are taught from a young age that they are a body, perhaps a mind. But we're not taught what the nature of the mind is, what its limits and capabilities are, and how it shapes our identity and experience of the world. We're not taught that the sense of identity we have isn't fixed, even though we all experience the fickleness of identity when we shift into a dream character, or when our identity disappears in deep sleep. All this happens in the dance between mind and the core of our awareness. Meditation isn't magic. It makes sense. Place more attention on what you are, and you will discover more of what you are. And this is a very simple way to think about it, right? Place more attention on what you are, and you'll discover more of what you are. Whatever we place our attention on, we will start to know more. So it's simply a redirection of attention to the one that is seeing, to the origin of sight, to the origin of sound, or hearing, seeing, tasting, right? This is the beginning of meditation. So we'll talk next time a little bit more about the stages of meditation. If you have any questions, please do write them down and we will note those next time. Let's take a few minutes before we close, spend some time together in silence. And as we emerge from the silence, recognizing the flurry of activity around us and the flurry of activity that we are, our own bodies and minds are flurries of activity, and appreciating this give and take between different levels of consciousness. Let us function and work and play through this, and we'll meet again next week.